Hey, deep divers. You wanted a clear picture of where inflation stands right now. So you sent us a stack of recent articles and reports. And honestly, even I was surprised by some of what we found.
Yeah.
With the recent election, there's a lot of uncertainty in the air, and we're going to try to cut through the noise and understand what this all means for you. So get this. Consumer inflation actually went up last month for the first time in like 7 months.
Yeah, it's
But don't worry. It's not as bad as it sounds.
interesting. We're seeing some conflicting signals right now. For example, consumer inflation actually ticked up last month for the first time in 7 months. It was 2.6% annually, up from 2.4% in September.
Okay, wait, hold up. Inflation going up. That sounds like bad news,
So-
right? Because we keep hearing that it's supposed to be cooling down.
Well, it's not quite as simple as that. This
Right.
2.6% figure is the overall consumer price index, and it includes some notoriously volatile categories.
Okay.
Like rent and used cars and airfares, all of which saw price jumps in October.
So those categories are kind of skewing the overall picture. What do we take those out of the equation?
Well, that's where core inflation comes in. This measure strips out those volatile food and energy costs to give us a more stable view of underlying price trends. And core inflation actually held steady at 3.3% annually.
Still higher than the Fed's 2% target, though. I have to admit, I'm still a bit confused about how all this connects to the Fed and interest rates, because it feels like every time I hear about inflation, the Fed is either raising or lowering rates.
Right. It's definitely a complex relationship.
Yeah.
But you can think of it this way. The Fed is trying to steer the economy towards the sweet spot, where prices are stable but growth isn't stifled. So when inflation is high, they raise interest rates to make borrowing more expensive.
Oh, yeah?
And that slows down spending and theoretically brings prices down.
So it's like tapping the brakes on the economy.
Exactly. But if they slam on the brakes too hard, it could trigger a recession. So they have to be very careful and deliberate with their rate decisions. This recent uptick in inflation is likely giving them pause. As it suggests, those brakes might need to stay on for a while longer.
Makes sense. Speaking of things that could throw the economy off course, can we talk about the elephant in the room, the election?
Absolutely. Inflation was a major talking point throughout the campaigns. And now, with Trump back in office, there's a lot of uncertainty about how his policies will impact prices.
Right.
He's already talking about ramping up oil and gas drilling to bring down energy costs. But some economists are skeptical. They argue that other proposals like increased tariffs and stricter immigration policies could actually fuel inflation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's almost like a tug of war with different forces pulling inflation in opposite directions.
It is a great analogy. And to complicate matters further, we also have some surprisingly positive economic indicators. The economy actually grew at nearly a 3% annual rate over the past 6 months, driven largely by strong consumer spending. Wait, seriously? With all this talk of inflation and economic doom and gloom, people are still out there spending money.
It seems so. And it's not just any consumer spending. Data suggests that higher earners are driving this trend,
Interesting.
which raises some interesting questions about income inequality and its potential impact on inflation.
Okay. So we've got rising inflation, a newly elected president with potentially inflationary policies, and strong economic growth fueled by high earners. This is making my head spin. Where do we even go from here?
It's definitely a mixed bag.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer. But amidst all the uncertainty, it's worth noting that Fed Chair Jerome Powell recently expressed confidence that inflation is still on track to reach that 2% target, albeit slowly.
Okay. He acknowledged that getting there will likely be a bumpy ride, but he also highlighted that many of the pressures driving price increases are beginning to ease.
Okay, that's a little reassuring, I guess.
Yeah.
But with some factors at play, how can he be so sure?
Well, he pointed to a few key things. For one, wage growth has actually been outpacing inflation for the past year and a half.
Hold on, you're saying people's wages are going up faster than prices? That's actually good news for once.
It is. And it's a sign that the economy might not be overheating as much as some fear. Powell emphasized that wage growth isn't accelerating so rapidly that it's pushing inflation higher. It's a delicate balance.
So wages are going up, but not too much. What about consumer expectations? Are people bracing themselves for prices to keep skyrocketing?
That's a crucial point, and thankfully the data suggests otherwise. A recent survey by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York found that consumers expect prices to rise only 2.9% over the next year. That's the lowest expectation in nearly 4 years.
Wow, people are actually feeling optimistic about inflation. Why is that such a big deal?
Because consumer expectations can actually become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
You mean if people believe inflation will stay low, it actually can?
Exactly. If people aren't worried about prices spiking, they're less likely to rush out and buy things before they get more expensive. That takes some pressure off demand, which can in turn help moderate actual price increases.
That's amazing. It's like our collective mindset can actually influence the economy.
Yeah, it really highlights the power of psychology and economics.
Okay, that's one less thing to worry about.
Yeah.
But what about rent? It feels like everyone's been complaining about rent increases lately. Is there any relief in sight?
There might be Redfin. The real estate brokerage reports that rent increases are finally starting to slow down. For new leases, rents were only 0.2% higher in October compared to a year ago.
That's a huge difference. But why is the government still reporting higher rent increases then?
Well, it's because they're measuring all rents, not just new leases. Many landlords are still raising rents on existing tenants to catch up with the higher prices they've been charging for new leases over the past few years.
Oh, so it's a lagging indicator. Hopefully we'll see the government's rent measurements start to come down soon too.
Let's hope so. But of course, it all depends on how the broader economy evolves. We're in a period of transition with a new administration and a lot of unknowns on the horizon. It's a complex situation with a lot of moving parts.
Well, that's why we love doing these deep dives. It's all about understanding the nuances and connecting the dots. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the recent uptick in inflation to the Fed's balancing act, the impact of the election, and those surprising consumer expectations. What does all this mean for us, the everyday people trying to navigate this economic maze?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? If we connect all these threads, to the bigger picture. The main takeaway, I think, is this. While inflation is still a concern, the overall trend seems to be heading downward. However, with the new administration and so many economic variables in play, it's crucial to stay informed and be prepared for potential shifts.
So what you're saying is don't panic and bury all my money in the backyard just yet.
Exactly. Panicking never helps. The key is to make informed financial decisions and stay adaptable. Remember, knowledge is power. By understanding the forces that are shaping the economy, you're in a much better position to navigate the ups and downs.
Okay, that makes sense. No burying treasure just yet. So to recap, inflation ticked up a bit last month, but most experts believe it will continue to cool down eventually. The Fed is keeping a close eye on things, and their interest rate decisions will have a big impact in the coming months. And of course, we can't forget about the potential effects of the election and the new administration's policies.
Exactly. It's a constantly evolving situation. But the more you understand the underlying dynamics, the more confident you can be in making sound financial choices.
It's like we're all sailing through these choppy economic waters trying to avoid the rocks.
I like that analogy. And remember, even with some rough seas ahead, there are always opportunities to be found.
Out of all the information we've covered, what stood out to you most? What surprised you?
Honestly, the power of consumer expectations really struck me. It's remarkable how our collective beliefs about inflation can actually influence the real economy. We're not just passengers on this economic ship. Our actions and expectations can actually steer the course.
That's such a cool concept. It's like we have this hidden superpower to shape the economy with our mindset.
Exactly. It makes you realize how interconnected everything is.
All right, deep divers. We're getting close to the end of our inflation deep dive. We've just scratched the surface here, but hopefully this gives you a solid foundation to build on.
And remember, we always encourage you to keep learning and exploring. The more you understand about economics, the better equipped you'll be to navigate your own financial journey.
So before we wrap up, any final thoughts or insights that our listeners should keep in mind as they process all of this?
You know what I find particularly interesting is the disconnect between the slowdown in new lease rent increases and the continued rise in the government's overall rent measurement.
Can you unpack that a bit more?
Yeah.
What's causing that disconnect?
Sure. As we discussed earlier, the government's measurement includes all rents, not just new leases. Many landlords are still raising rents on existing tenants to catch up with the higher prices they've been charging for new leases over the past few years. It demonstrates the complexities of economic data and how sometimes, digging deeper reveals a more nuanced picture.
It's a great reminder to look beyond the headlines and really understand the data. Sometimes the most important insights are hidden in the details.
Absolutely. And that's what we're all about here on The Deep Dive, helping you understand the why behind the news, not just the what's.
Well said. Now we want to hear from you. What insights really resonated with you today? What questions are still swirling around in your head? Hit us up on social media. We love hearing your thoughts. And who knows? Your question might spark a whole new deep dive.
I have to say, the interplay of consumer psychology and economic trends is something I'll be pondering for a while. It raises some thought-provoking questions about, individual behavior and the collective impact we have on the economy.
Right. It's a reminder that we're not just along for the ride. We're all active participants in shaping the economic landscape.
Exactly. And with so many factors in flux right now, from the Fed's next moves to the unfolding impacts of the new administration's policies, it's more important than ever to stay engaged and informed.
Well said. So until next time, deep divers, keep those brains buzzing, stay curious, and keep exploring the fascinating world around us.
And remember, knowledge is power.
See ya. See ya.